I would like to lay out some of my thoughts on the latest developments from Las Vegas and what we know about Stephen Paddock and some of the issues around this. First and foremost, well, I want to put this video into two parts. Firstly, addressing the issue of how we define terrorism as a concept, and secondly, about Stephen Paddock, about gun laws, etc. Firstly, on the issue of terrorism, one thing that's been circulating social media and discussion in general is why is it not being called a terrorist attack? And the contention is if this guy had been dark skinned, had he been a Muslim especially, it would automatically be called a terrorist attack. I think there's some truth in that, and I think it's hard to escape the fact that, particularly in an American context, there is a discrepancy between how violent incidents are deemed. This was a white guy, um, and so far, over 24 hours on, it's still not being called a terrorist attack. Um, Almost immediately, when the suspect is, for example, I don't know, a Somali refugee or a Muslim, it will almost certainly be immediately branded a terrorist attack, particularly in right wing circles. Um, Majid Nawaz made a good point today. He said that everyone has a responsibility not to try and obfuscate the other side, not to try and make out that their political opposite is somehow responsible. What we have to go on is the facts and the facts alone. Now, in terms of defining terrorism, there is actually words matter. Words do matter, and the problem is if you talk about defining it, then people think you're downplaying what's happened. I don't think that's the case. I think it is important to define what terrorism is legally. In most jurisdictions, I don't know about the law in Nevada, but in most jurisdictions, terrorism is defined as an act of violence to further a political or ideological goal. That is why Islamist attacks are classed as terrorism, because it is for the stated goal for jihadists to spread their caliphate. Likewise, with other extreme groups, whether it be white supremacists or other groups, again, with white supremacists, often the intention is to start a race war. With far left groups, it is to attack right wing people, etc. So there are clear political motivations there. And it isn't true to say that there are not examples of white attackers who haven't been classed as terrorists. I can think of two prominent examples. Anders Breivik in Norway, one of the worst ever attacks in Europe, that was considered a terrorist attack because Anders Breivik was an ultra nationalist, a white supremacist. He was going on the stated aim of trying to kill as many left leaning people and Muslims as possible. In the event, he killed very few Muslims actually, but did kill a lot of young left wing people. David Copeland, 1999 in Britain, over a period of about a fortnight, he caused terror in London, killing three people and wounding hundreds in nail bomb attacks, including there was horrifying images of a baby with a nail through its skull. The Soho nail bomber, as we know him, he's classed as a terrorist. So it's not true to say that there are not examples of white terrorists. I would suggest, and as far as I know, the FBI has classed Dylan Roof as a terrorist because he was working from the point of view of white supremacy. Timothy McVeigh is classed as a terrorist. So there are examples of white terrorists. Nevertheless, in recent years, I think it is fair to say that there has been a perception of double standards. And perhaps that needs to change. Perhaps certain right wing media outlets need to be a little bit more consistent in this and not always try to find excuses when the suspect is a white man, or alternatively, not jump to conspiracy theories when the suspect happens to be dark skinned. It's not about trivializing what the person's done, and it's certainly not about feeling sorry for them or anything like that. Stephen Paddock done an evil, evil thing, and he's a despicable. He will go down in infamy for this wicked, evil act, as evil as anything an ideological terrorist would do. Now, investigations are ongoing. What do we know about him? He was apparently from a place called Mesquite, which, as I understand, is about 100 miles north of Las Vegas. Um, he had no criminal record. He had a girlfriend of Asian heritage. I've heard Filipino. She's currently she's not a suspect, but she's a person of interest. And he had a gambling problem. We know that he had as many as 10 firearms, including assault rifles, in his hotel suite in Las Vegas where the shooting took place. So there's a lot of things to look at here. Incidentally, he also had a father who was on the FBI's most wanted list. I think it would be very important to ascertain what sort of relationship he had with his father. He may not have had a criminal record, but if there's some sort of something has come from that, I don't think it's a total coincidence. If your father's on the FBI's 10 most wanted in the 1960s, and then you end up as America's most infamous mass shooter or most prolific mass shooter. Right, on the gun issue, I accept this is controversial and I accept that what I might say might offend some people, but I really think there are important things to look at with this. I think if the mass murder of 20 plus children in a school in Sandy Hook isn't going to change minds, isn't going to change the American gun culture, I don't know what will. So let me make my position clear. I'm not anti guns, I never have been. And I'm realistic enough to know you can't just get rid of all guns in America. That would be stupid. It would be unworkable. And there are people with legitimate reasons to have guns. Hunters, America, we have to remember in Europe, America is largely a rural society. That's an aspect to look at. I also believe that people have a right to the Second Amendment to have guns for self protection. But I also think there are too many efforts by the gun lobby to weaken gun laws. An example of this is what Hillary Clinton has just raised, and I think she's right. There is an effort trying to go for the House of Representatives to make it easier to buy so called silencers. Now, just imagine this. If this gunman, it's bad enough as it is, 60 people killed, over 500 wounded, the most violent day in America since 9/11. Imagine had he had silencers. So he could be shooting away. People wouldn't even know a massacre was going on. They would not know to run away from the scene. So it's very plausible that would greatly exacerbate what is already a very bloody situation. Um, I don't think I'll ever understand the culture, for example, of open carry, that people can legally carry firearms into public areas. I don't think I'll ever grasp that. And I don't think I'll ever understand how anyone could argue that a private citizen, whoever they are, should have access to assault weapons. I cannot understand that. I just can't understand why anyone would think a private citizen could have weapons designed for the battlefield. I mean, that's crazy to me. I think it's quite. I mean, the last 2 years with Orlando and now this have been the two deadliest mass shootings in American history, certainly in modern times. I mean, if we're not counting all the massacres that took place in the West and obviously outside of the American Civil War, but if this doesn't change anything, if Sandy Hook doesn't change anything, it's quite a despairing situation. I personally feel, well, first and foremost, Stephen Paddock is to blame. Let's be clear about that. But I do think the gun lobby has a lot to answer for by making it harder to have common sense gun regulation. What I don't understand is why responsible gun owners have such a problem with reasonable measures such as background checks. Now, I appreciate that in this case, it probably was a bit harder because Stephen Paddock had no criminal record. So it's not like a dealer could have said, oh, you've got a criminal record, I'm not selling you that. So, granted, this case is a bit different, and also the shooter is older than is usually the case. Most shooters tend to be young men. And he had no violent history apparently. So granted, it is harder, but this should, in my opinion, be extended to people who might be mentally unbalanced. And there are reports circulating that is the case. I'm not going to elaborate because these are still flying around, but clearly someone who has a history of mental illness should not have access to firearms either, even if that mental illness doesn't necessarily manifest itself in violence. Um, when you're buying a firearm, the dealer, in my opinion, should be really, really pushing every aspect of your background. That's not a violation of the Second Amendment. It's common sense. I also frankly don't understand how he could get his firearms into a hotel, a public place. He might legally have them, but maybe then the law should be tightened so that people can't just bring firearms into a hotel. Well, I mean, what about hotel security? Why can't I don't understand why they can't check that and say, sorry, this is guns are prohibited here. People say massacres occur in gun-free zones. Well, clearly where he was shooting from wasn't a gun-free zone because he got the guns there. Or if it was, the security weren't doing a very good job. I mean, there is a lot of questions to be asked here. And I appreciate that some of my viewers might be of a more right-wing, pro-gun persuasion. All I can say is I'm not telling the American people how to think. I'm not telling the American people what to do. If I was American, I would feel immensely frustrated with this situation because, as a lot of commentators have said, there's condemnation, there's vigils, and then it's just back to normal. President Trump said how sad it was, he said how awful it was, but President Trump has been one of the biggest supporters of the NRA, and this is going to go back to the norm. Nothing's going to change. And I can't think of another country which would have a situation like this and not do something about it significant. In Australia, after the mass shooting in Tasmania in 1996, they took action. In Britain, after the mass shooting in Dunblane in the same year, 1996, we took action. Now, that hasn't completely stopped gun crime in either country, but has significantly reduced the chances of mass shootings happening. People talk about the population difference, even per capita. The fact of the matter is, the United States has a higher rate of gun violence, and I don't think anyone can rationally dispute that. So I am not telling the American people what to do. Please don't think that. I'm just saying I don't understand this. I don't understand why people can't see it as a problem that private citizens can just carry around loaded firearms. I can't understand why so many people don't seem to have an issue with that. Doesn't make sense to me. And that's just my truthful observation. Apparently, there was a group of British soldiers who helped out among the first responders from the Queen's Dragoon Guards. There's also been lots of, as there always is in these cases, individual acts of heroism. So we'll leave it there. But it's a horrendous situation, and unfortunately, the outlook is cynical. If this doesn't change anything, nothing will.